I purposely bring exercise in fourth sequence. So I first go after nutrition, then I go after sleep, then I go after stress management, and I touch exercise fourth. It's like the four wheels of the lifestyle car. And any flat tire in your car, and your car will not go forward on the highway. Most of the benefit starts to be physically experienced when you start fixing nutrition. It's the easiest thing to start working on. And we focus on getting enough protein because a large audience of mine is protein deficient. So none of the other advice is going to work well if they're protein deficient.
I'd like to welcome you to At the Helm. In today's podcast, I'm really delighted to welcome Dr. Roshani Sanghani. Dr. Sanghani is board certified in endocrinology, diabetes, metabolism, and she treats patients in Mumbai, India, at the Reisaan Health clinic. She grew up in both Chicago and Mumbai, and she did her specialist endocrinology training in Chicago before returning to India in 2011. Now, in addition to being an endocrinologist, she is a certified diabetes educator, and she is a certified personal fitness trainer. That's quite an interesting combination. And she basically consults with people to change their diets, help them adopt healthier lifestyles, and to address their chronic conditions, for which, as we know, insulin resistance is often the root cause. In doing so, she helps them to reduce or even get off many of their medications and to heal their bodies. She also has an interest in women's health and treating conditions such as PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. And she is the author of a new book, which we will get onto in a minute. But I'm just so delighted, Dr. Sanghani. May I call you Roshani?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Just delighted to welcome you to At the Helm. It's a real privilege to have you with us all the way from India. Just to start off, I mean, you've had such a fascinating medical career in both the US and India. And I understand that you say you were a kind of a typical endocrinologist until you had an older male patient in India in about 2013 or somewhere thereabouts who declined to take insulin, even though you were recommending it, and he had worsening diabetes. And you have called that encounter a life-changing moment. Can you kind of give us a before and after in terms of your practice, you know, how you were practicing before that and how that changed things for you?
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Helm, for having me. It's always a pleasure to connect with anybody who wants to spread the message of nutrition or lifestyle change and helping the body to heal. So thank you for what you do. I was just like any other regular doctor. I had been trained to study the algorithms, to study the guidelines, and to follow protocols. And the protocol said, if somebody has an HbA1c that's not at goal, add metformin. If that doesn't work in 3 months, add another drug. 3 months later, if it's not okay, add another. Keep going. If the A1C still doesn't come down, talk to them about insulin and get them on insulin. This is for type 2 diabetes. And I am a sincere student. So if I read something like that, I follow the instructions. I'm going to do what is considered right. And I blindly followed that. The logic was that if they're not doing well on 1 medicine, 2 medicine, 3, etc., it means that their pancreas is now failing and it's not making its own insulin anymore. This was the conditioning that I had. And so I was convinced, and so I would convince my patients till 2013, that I know you don't want to go on insulin, but it's the right thing for you. It's going to protect you. It's going to keep your glucose levels down. We don't want the glucose levels high. That's what causes all the damage in diabetes. And so pills aren't working. We have to go to insulin. And I would get a lot of my patients to convert to insulin. This particular man was sincere. He was cooperating with me as far as dialogue and conversation. He was very respectful. but he just wouldn't have the insulin prescription. He's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I had two options. One was end my relationship, doctor-patient relationship, or reevaluate my strategy and think of what else can I do to help him if he's not willing to start the medication. And that's when my diabetes educator hat, which I had acquired that in 2011 when we were moving from the US to India, but it was sort of lying dormant. And one of the reasons I took that certification was timed to do it right before coming to India, so that I wouldn't have this separation between me and the patient, because it was, to me, it was like coming back after 10 years. I didn't want that gap between me and the patient. I wanted to be using the educator role to bridge the gap in communication and know what the culture is, know what the habits and lifestyles are. So I suddenly realized now's the time I need to use my diabetes educator hat and talk to this man about nutrition. So that's when I went into diet recall with him, realized what he was eating. And, I still thought, the doctor in me still thought his pancreas is burnt out. What's going to happen? It's my only choice. So let's do it, but let's call him back in a few days quickly to see how it goes. Because if you have a failed pancreas, and this man was eating, if you know Indian food, roti or chapati, it's the Indian flatbread. He was eating 10 of those a day. And that, if you count in terms of carbohydrates, 10 of those, 50, it's about 150 grams of carbohydrates just from that flatbread, plus all the other carbohydrates he was eating. And if you're eating that much, it's obviously a high amount. So I had negotiated with him to cut that to half, which would be about, 75 grams of carbohydrate coming from this, and then all the other input that he was taking. Now, if you're someone whose pancreas is not working, your glucose is still going to stay pretty high. What surprised me was he came back the next week and his glucose had dropped significantly. And I was like, he looks well. He doesn't look toxic. He doesn't look like the type of, we've seen people with type 1 diabetes whose pancreas has really been damaged. They're not making insulin. Their glucose is sky high. They're very toxic. They're very unwell. This man was not losing weight. He was cool, comfortable, happy. He just didn't look like someone whose body was not making insulin, especially with the glucose levels coming down. And at that point, I wasn't still checking the blood test, because there is actually a blood test that you can do, and I do it on everybody now. Back then I didn't do it, but I just intuitively was like, his pancreas is working. I was forcing him insulin last week, but that doesn't look like he needs it anymore. And that just completely transformed me. It's like, wait a minute, I might have been pushing insulin on people without really confirming if their pancreas is functioning or not for type 2 diabetes. And that became the biggest turning point, where I was like, no, now I'm going to use education first, nutrition and lifestyle first. I'm not just going to be the one who's pushing up the medications and not getting deep into the woods with them with the lifestyle changes.
Yeah, so that really resonates with me. I'm a humble family physician, you're an endocrinologist, but like you, I believed what I was told, and I had confidence in what I was told, and I tried to apply it in treating my patients. And then, I actually realized rather late in my medical career that, here I am prescribing insulin because the other drugs have so-called failed, and we think of all these medications as additive. I just realized the more insulin I'm giving people, the heavier they're getting. And they're telling me that ever since I put them on insulin, they're gaining weight and now they can't exercise. And so, it just seems we focus so much on the glucose lowering properties of insulin, and we forget all the other things that it does. But as a family doc, I really got minimal training in my medical student training, and as a family physician, minimal training in nutrition, lifestyle medicine. But I've secretly kind of hoped that an endocrinologist, at some stage in your training, you would have covered that and it would have been a big part of your training. Am I being naive in thinking that? In other words, did you, or have you, in all of your endocrinology training, the power of diet and lifestyle to change things for the better, was that drummed into you, or was it absent from your training too?
It was absent from my training, although it was, it is a fact that endocrinologists are the most educated when it comes to being qualified to treat diabetes. But I think I need to clarify what that means is we're the most trained when it comes to prescribing drugs. We're not the most trained when it comes to prescribing lifestyle change. There was no part of my curriculum that was dedicated to understanding how to change somebody or help somebody change their habits or lifestyle. There was no part of my training that was dedicated to how can I help people be de-prescribed or to get them off of medication. The entire agenda was to learn how to manage medications and to learn how to be the experts at prescribing the highest level or most extreme level of medications for diabetes. The worst, most uncontrolled, toughest cases of diabetes were sent to us so that we could prescribe more medication. If there were nutrition chapters in our curriculum, I don't think I was paying attention, but I passed my boards and I was practicing and clearly getting away with it. But what happened was, luckily, my fellowship, the way the building was designed, there was a corridor and we would go in and out of the patient consult rooms and had to talk to the senior doctor, like the attending physician, about the person and explain our plan. This is what I want to do. This is the medication change I'm thinking. And we would go in and out of these patient rooms and move the patients forward. On the other side of that same hallway was, in my fellowship, was the Nutrition and Wellness Center. And so the educators and dietitians were going in and out, and group classes would be going in and out. And that just sort of was like being planted in my head is there's a lot of diabetes education activity going on that I'm missing. It was almost like FOMO, like fear of missing out. Is they're doing something interesting on that side, but I never was asked to go into that. In fact, when I started sitting in on them, because I was curious, it was seemed to be an anomaly. Like, why would you participate in that? We're the doctors. Like, we don't mingle with that. And almost like a hierarchy that I didn't understand. But I wanted to know, so I went and sat in on those things. So I think somewhere it was parked in the back of my head, but no, to answer your question, it was not a formal part of my expected knowledge base.
Yeah, so that's rather disheartening, if I can say that. But are you able to, I mean, you're practicing in Mumbai in India, from an outsider's perspective, I just know the subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent has such a large population. So on the population basis alone, there should be many, many people in India with type 2 diabetes. But I'm hearing that there's also rapidly rising rates, incidence and prevalence, and that it's maybe even the incidence is higher maybe in India than in other parts of the world. So can you just tell us, what is the magnitude of the problem in India? Is there maybe a reason why India is worse off than other parts of the world in terms of this?
Yes, so two statistics here. I think India and China have more diabetes than the US and the UK, even though the US and the UK have more obesity in terms of ranking. Okay. So the Asian body phenotype is less tolerant. So Indian and Asian body types are less tolerant of obesity, and they're getting more of the cardiometabolic, so cardiac disease, early cardiac issues, or diabetes related, type 2 diabetes related conditions. They're getting those at earlier stages of obesity and weight gain compared to their Caucasian counterparts. So the Caucasians are able to pack on more body fat before they get into the cardiometabolic disease. It's still a very large problem in the West as well, but there's something different about our just body types. Specific to India, there's another issue, which is the cultural preference for vegetarianism. And I say that with respect for the cultural beliefs that go behind it. I'm a vegetarian myself. So there's nothing like we are going to force people out of this belief system, but knowing that people are choosing this way, we realize that their carbohydrate intake is automatically going above what we would consider a low carbohydrate lifestyle. And it is automatically sort of substituting poor quality proteins because of being vegetarian and plant-based. So this particular nutritional deficiency, I think, is driving a very large part of India's problem. It's gone to the point, since you're a family medicine doc, you see children, it's getting to the point where there are some states, we've got 1 in 3 children with fatty liver and high triglycerides, 1 in 3. And India's population at an absolute number, I think we recently overtook China in absolute numbers being the most populated country in the world. 1 in 3 of us, it's not good for the future. So, I mean, the Prime Minister has set aside 500,000 rupees for senior citizens for healthcare, but at the rate at which we're bringing in youth into sickness, this is not going to be manageable for India.
Yeah, and we're seeing something similar in the West with teenagers, adolescents developing type 2 diabetes, which is, in my day, that was unheard of. When I was a student, it just didn't happen. So it's very scary. But so if you've got a cultural preference for vegetarianism, is there a way that you try and increase healthy protein in that population? And if you're trying to do low carb advice, I guess one has to replace it with something. And it would seem to be healthy protein. And so how do you do that?
Yes, so I could walk you through a practical example. I should also say the other thing, not just being vegetarian, the other thing that is definitely contributing to India's issue is we've adopted the junk food culture, the sugar sweetened beverages culture, the desserts and sweets and treats, and every festive occasion or celebration to show love is to exchange sugar. So that's also a very big part of it. But how do we tackle this on a day-to-day basis? So let me walk you through a typical Indian vegetarian meal setup and then how we swap it. Is a typical, let's say, lunch would be, if you're the bread eating kind, it would be 2 rotis or chapatis usually, and 1 cup of a vegetable and 1 cup of a dal or a lentil pulse or a legume, and maybe some yogurt. And people who are eating a lot of carbs all day, like more than 100 grams of carbs all day, they tend to be hungry. So if I were to suddenly tell them, oh, take your 2 rotis and make it 1, they're going to get nervous about that. They're going to be like, I'll be so hungry. I need those 2 rotis to feel full and satiated. Or if it's a rice eater, it might be a cup of rice with those sides. And what tends to happen in India is the carbohydrate is the hero of the meal. It's the bulk of the meal. It is the way you measure, like, did you eat well today? Oh, did the child eat well today? Yeah, they had 2 rotis. Or did they eat well today? Yeah, they had a cup and a half of rice. So we're quantifying the adequacy of the meal based on the serving of the carbohydrate rather than looking at, because everything's so spicy a lot of times that the vegetables and the dal are so hot that you need to take small portions of that and dilute it out with the carbohydrates. So if I was looking at one of these combinations, instead of just straight away saying, cut your roti or rice to half, and then they start mentally feeling hungry at the sound of it, I would tell them, look, your protein is already deficient. Your symptoms of lethargy, weakness, poor muscle mass, lack of injury, repairing your injuries, lack of recovery, chronic pain, hair fall, poor quality skin, recurrent infections, low immunity. You just told me you have all these symptoms, poor gut health. You've told me all this. That's all linked to your protein deficiency. We need to get more protein in you. And from everything you told me you've been eating, these are the proteins you are already eating. It's the yogurt, it's the dal, it's the nuts, the seeds, it's the paneer or the cheese or any dairy that you're willing to take. If they're willing to take eggs, we'll mark out the eggs as that's a good quality protein you're already having. We'll ask them to double that first. That's the first step, is double the serving of the protein that you already have. And then they mentally know, oh, I'm going to be so full if you do that. I'm going to be it's going to be so satiating. Okay, why don't you then cut your carbohydrates to half? Once you're so full from the protein, cut the carbs to half. Because when you visualize being served an extra bowl of legumes or lentils, that's going to be feeling what Indians call heavy. That feels heavy. I think that's what they mean by satiety. It's just they're not used to feeling satiated, so they call it's heavy, or it takes time to digest. Again, I think that means it delays the hunger between meals is what they're interpreting as it's heavy to digest. So I'm like, don't you want to be full? Why would you want to be hungry? So there's this whole psychological maneuvering that has to happen to get them to realize why they want to increase the protein rather than me showing up and saying, let's take away your carbohydrates.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredibly valuable. Just the practical way that you do it is incredibly valuable. And I say that partly because, as you know, we broadcasting from British Columbia, and in Western Canada and British Columbia, we have a very large South Asian population. And I suspect that many of them are following the traditional cultural diet that they learned in India. And so what you're saying is not just sort of an abstract concept, but it's really practical here in British Columbia, I think. And I wanted to ask you, because I mean the prevailing dogma, the mantra has been since the 1970s, low fat, high carb. That's what I was taught. That's what we've all been taught. So has that sort of permeated Indian society? Is there like a fear of eating eggs? Can I even use the word brainwashed? Have people been sort of just, it's been inculcated into people that there are these bad things but have basically emanated from the US and from the West?
We have embraced it with open arms. We have we have been listening very carefully over the Atlantic and saying, oh, they're saying, make sure you don't eat too much protein. Oh, we should eat whole grains for heart health. Oh, we should avoid saturated fat. Oh, we should have refined oils. And oh, we should not eat egg yolks. And oh, we should avoid dietary cholesterol. So everybody here on first day with me is avoiding the shrimp. They're throwing out the egg yolks. They are throwing out the ghee or not buying it or not making it. They've switched to the processed refined oils, thinking it's heart healthy. They're having oats for breakfast. They're having whole grain bread. They're doing all this thinking it's healthy.
Good intentions.
Good
Yeah,
intentions.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I just want to ask you, because I find it fascinating. You're an endocrinologist and you're a certified fitness trainer and you're a diabetic educator. I mean, that just strikes me as an unusual combination. Most endocrinologists, I don't think, have those other certifications. You've touched on it already, but I just think that's really wonderful because I'm sure it enables you to really communicate better with your patients than most of us physicians can. And it also makes me ask, well, at what stage do you introduce exercise?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. And I should say with full honesty and humility, I only went after those certifications because I felt incompetent and stupid in those areas. I just was not okay with if a question comes to me about nutrition or exercise, I have zero say in the matter because I don't know. And I was not the kind who would bluff and just pick up what I've heard from the grapevine. I'm the kind of person who would want to read it for myself and make sure that I've internalized the knowledge. And I didn't like having to keep mum on those points because I would have to say, oh, sorry, you'll have to talk to your nutritionist or dietitian, or oh, sorry, you say you have neck pain or back pain and that's why you can't exercise, or you say you have a gap in your spine, or you have spondylosis and that's why you can't exercise, or you had a hernia operation 15 years ago and that's why you can't. I was like, I am not convinced that those are valid reasons to stop exercising indefinitely, but I don't know anything about exercise. And I was a typical Indian medical student. I was busy studying my entire life. I've never been a fit athletic person at all. I only started exercising once I realized the value of it for my own preventive health and my personal health. But I had zero knowledge in how to prescribe it. So just to sort of quantify why I went after those, I did another certification for emotional eating and mindful eating because I didn't know what it means to pay attention to how we feel when we eat. It was such a basic thing to not be mindful when we eat. But so to come to your question, I purposely bring exercise in fourth sequence. So I first go after nutrition, then I go after sleep, then I go after stress management, and I touch exercise fourth in that sequence. And I'll explain why. And I explain the sequence in my book. It's like the four wheels of the lifestyle car. And any flat tire in your car, and your car will not go forward on the highway. Most of the benefit starts to be physically experienced when you start fixing nutrition. It's the easiest thing to start working on. and we focus on getting enough protein because a large audience of mine is protein deficient. So none of the other advice is going to work well if they're protein deficient. So I have to fix that first. So I get protein up, then we start looking at sleep. Why? Because you start having more energy when you get more protein in, and when your carbs come down, your fatigue and lethargy goes down. When you're sleeping better, your lethargy and low energy and fatigue goes down. Automatically, by these two, your stress management skills already start to go up. I think there's a lot to say for metabolic psychiatry and what deficiencies in nutrients, vital nutrients, are helping with the mind. So nutrition starts to indirectly work on stress management, and having better sleep helps the mind. Those 7 hours of rest, recharge, cleaning up the brain from all that waste products of being awake and online, waking up with a more fresh mind helps you have better stress management and coping skills. And if there's still some more stress management we need to do, actually that section of my book is the biggest one from the 4, is the how to change how we think about problems and how we respond versus react to problems. So once you're in better shape with these 3, then I bring in exercise. Because if I was to give exercise prescriptions to someone who was malnourished, it wouldn't work. If I gave exercise prescriptions to someone who's not sleeping well, they wouldn't recover and they wouldn't recover from injuries, or build the muscle as growth hormone comes in deep sleep. If I prescribed exercise to someone who's super stressed, it's going to be very difficult for them to embrace it because their mind is not in the right place. But when I do it this way, they're automatically ready, feeling better here, feeling better in the body. And they're like, yes, there's no resistance to the exercise conversation.
Right. So if I can just take you up on one thing there, you've mentioned the kind of improvements in the mind and in mental health. So I was wanting to ask you, because we know that type 2 diabetes is a metabolic problem, but there's increasing evidence now that just about all mental health also has its root in metabolic problems, and even something like Alzheimer's disease at its root can be related to metabolism. So with the work that you're doing, are you seeing kind of spin-offs or benefits to people in their mental health, even maybe in preventing Alzheimer's disease? And you might not have done it for long enough to know that last part yet, but to me, it would just make sense.
Yes. So of course, you're right. I haven't seen it play out long enough to know that what happened to cognition long term, but people who come in on antidepressants, people who come in on sleeping medications are able to de-prescribe, down titrate under the supervision of their prescribing doctor who put them on it. I don't just cold turkey take those off because some of them need to come off slowly, but they have been generally, I've seen the pattern is they're able to get off of all of those because they don't need it anymore. Their mood is better, their sleep is better, and they don't need these, and they don't want the side effects.
That is amazing, because I mean, I think one thing we can say about patients is they don't like being on medications.
Yeah.
You know, who would want to be on lots of medications and then they start interacting with each other and you get side effects and you get brain fog from being on too many drugs? I mean, who would want that in their lives? So, I mean, if it's just, I've done de-prescribing myself as a passion. And the benefits you see when you safely get people off the drugs, which they've thought were essential, and it's a learning curve for them, but it's a learning curve for us as physicians too. I mean, it's one of the most empowering and positive things that I can think of. And I know that in your work, empowering people is very important, and longitudinal care is important, because the traditional thing, you know, the easiest thing to do is to write a prescription. It takes you 30 seconds, take it over to your pharmacist and you're done. Whereas, you know, what we're talking about now is a fairly lengthy process. What we call in Canada, we call it longitudinal care. So seeing a person repeatedly, not just once and here you go.
Absolutely, Doc. And I think I had to revise my practice approach there as well. You know, it's just like you and I felt that experience of we did as we were taught and trained and exposed. I don't know about you, but I was exposed to the concept that diabetes can be managed in one-off reactive spontaneous visits. And I would write the prescription, they would go, whether they come back or not, when they come back or not, was all in their hands. There was no accountability that we're supposed to reconnect in this time frame, and you're definitely going to do that. I have no idea whether we're going to see each other again.
Mm.
And it started to play out badly, where I was so excited about low carb and all these things. I would, on that first visit, give them my speech is, don't you want to be on less medication? Do you promise you'll cut your carbs to half? Do you promise you'll increase your protein? Promise? Okay, I'm cutting your medications down today. Then they go home. And then they've got all these well-wishers and advisors and internet influencers and who knows what, or second thoughts, or even difficult times where I tried it, but then life got in the way and I couldn't stick with it. But because we're not in a relationship ongoing, their sugar starts to spike up and they've got nobody supervising it. And now I'm the one who's being implicated that my glucose went up because she messed around with my medication, that she did that too quickly, she did it too fast. I've done that to this patient. And so I said, this is risky. I'm acting like you can do acute care process for a chronic condition. And so, because if it's a fracture or an infection, a big bacterial, you give the treatment now, it gets better, it's done. So I had to flip it and say, no, we will do longitudinal only. We will do program only. If you're with me for 3 months, that's when I can come in. I will take over everything. I will take over nutrition, sleep management, stress management, exercise, fasting. Now, I don't make them work out with me. And if they have deeper, therapy needs, we refer them to other professionals, but I am almost like their primary care provider, actually, just orchestrating the whole thing. And then I'm comfortable and confident that, yes, I am in charge of managing your medication. Anything goes up and down, you come back to me. We are with you. I have a team. You have chat support. We have follow-ups every 7 to 10 days. You're logging your data into my app, and it's a closed loop. It's a safe environment to do everything under supervision.
Yeah, and you mentioned fasting there. Can I just ask you, does intermittent fasting, or what we can call time-restricted eating, does that form a part of what you advise?
Yes, I use it as my 5th strategy. So
Okay.
the 4 wheels of the car: nutrition, sleep, stress management,
Yeah.
exercise, you need those 4. If with that, your car gets you to your destination, that's it, we're done. If there's more work to be done, we need to take some luggage because the journey is longer than we thought, getting this insulin resistance to turn around, then we may need some luggage. So that's the optional 5th element, is fasting. So
Okay.
if we need it, we use it.
Right, right. And at the very beginning, you mentioned a blood test. I'm assuming that might be fasting C-peptide. I'm not sure. Good.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
so can you just give us a word or two about that? Because I would like all our patients to know about this test. And I know that where I am in Canada, very, very few people know anything about fasting C-peptide.
Well, let's make sure they know today. So, so the fasting C-peptide, again, we've been talking so much about insulin, and you and I kind of established this, but I'll say it again in a repeat, is insulin is a very important metabolic hormone. The most famous thing it does is lower glucose. But insulin does a lot of things. It stops you from burning your body fat. It puts fat into storage. It puts carbohydrates into storage. It is a growth hormone. That's why high insulin is now being linked with cancer as well. So insulin is also a life-saving hormone. Without it, you have type 1 diabetes, and we need to give you insulin to keep you alive. So it's an extremely important hormone. The body is smart. So the analogy I give is, do you see this marker, this pen, writing instrument? Would you say right now, is this active or inactive?
You're not using it.
I'm not using it. Can I use it the way it is right now if I want to write something?
You have to take the cap off, I think.
Right. So that would become active.
Yeah.
So insulin is secreted in the body this way. And when we want it to be activated, we take this off. This is C-peptide.
Okay.
This is active insulin. This will now be in and out of your system within minutes. It'll go do its job, and it'll be in and out of your system within minutes. It's a bit difficult to test this in a blood test because it fluctuates so quickly. People who are taking prescription insulin, they're injecting ready-made active insulin. It doesn't come with the cap.
Yeah.
So this stays in the bloodstream for more time. It's easier to measure. And so if you measure this, you know how much insulin is being made by your pancreas, because the only way you get C-peptide in your body is if this is being released by your pancreas.
Yeah, so if we're giving a patient insulin, your C-peptide is unaffected.
It's unaffected.
Mm.
So if you're on insulin injections, prescription dose, and I still see a high C-peptide, that means your body's making insulin. Even though you're being injected with it, you still have your own internal production of it. So why are we giving it to you from the outside?
Yeah, so I'm just hopeful that, 5-10 years from now, C-peptide fasting is just a standard test. Like at the moment, HbA1c is a standard test. Everybody gets it. So everyone needs to know their fasting C-peptide. That I think would be ahead. But another thing that really interests me is your focus on women's health and PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, because that affects things like infertility, altered menstrual cycles, acne, I mean, all sorts of things, which I would assume with the lifestyle change and the dietary recommendations that you are prescribing, those things might improve as well.
Yes. I've dedicated a whole section to women's health in the book as well. Insulin resistance. So maybe I should explain what that is insulin, like we discussed, is such an important hormone. But what if insulin is present in high amounts in the body, but it's not able to do its job? It's there, but it's ineffective. That's what we call insulin resistance. The work is not happening. So the intelligence in the body is like, oh, the work's not getting done. Okay, let's work harder. Let's fix this thing. Let's release more insulin. So you have higher and higher amounts of insulin. That's insulin resistance. When it gets to the point of, oh my gosh, now the glucose is not in control, that's when we call it diabetes. But even with a normal glucose, you can have insulin resistance in the ovaries. And that's when we talk about polycystic ovarian syndrome. Different people show different kind of vulnerabilities. Maybe you might get polycystic ovarian syndrome before you get diabetes. Maybe someone gets fatty liver or high triglycerides or high blood pressure or weight gain before they get diabetes. So there are various ways people can experience insulin resistance. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is directly linked with insulin resistance, even if you're lean or even if you're overweight. So when we make these changes, the same steps, the four wheels of the lifestyle car, we see insulin resistance get better. Women's menstrual cycles get regularized. We've had oops pregnancies because one of the symptoms of PCOS is to not have regular periods. So she's kind of used to 60 days, 90 days, no period. That's part of her PCOS lifelong experience. So she thinks she's not at risk of pregnancy. And in that situation, she can have an unexpected pregnancy, unexpected restoration of fertility. Fertility comes back. She doesn't realize, and now she's actually pregnant, but she hasn't got the period. She's not able to realize until the pregnancy is actually gone far ahead. So I have a lady I talk about in the book who actually went in for an MRI with low back pain, and the technician comes running out and he's like, "You've got a 5-month pregnancy in there and you didn't tell me?" And she's like, "I have a pregnancy inside? Are you serious? I didn't know that." Because she had PCOS and she'd given up on trying to get pregnant. She was working on diabetes reversal with me. And by accident, she conceived. It was a happy pregnancy and they're all fine. It's all good. But so yes, these things do happen. Skin will get better. Hair issues get better. So yes, a lot of things get better. And my prescription pattern for PCOS has completely changed over the years. I used to be giving people metformin, contraceptives, spironolactone. I haven't given those things to women in years now.
That's amazing. And that must be really gratifying medicine too, happy medicine, because you're helping people get pregnant, and what can be more precious than that. Yeah. So you've mentioned the drugs you used to previously prescribe for PCOS. What interests me is you've got all this training. You're such an expert in all the medications that get used for type 2 diabetes. That's your training, a big part of your training. How often are you still prescribing, let's just say, SGLT2 inhibitors or GLP-1 agonists or insulin? I mean, do you still use them, or is your program so successful that you hardly need to use them?
That's a great question. So for type 2 diabetes, I have stopped giving insulin 99% of the times. It used to be a standard thing. If they're on 4 or 5 drugs and it's not working, insulin's the next step. Now I have a heart-to-heart conversation with the person. I do their C-peptide and I'm like, look, I can give you insulin, but that's not the right treatment for you. It's the wrong treatment for you. It's going to give you the false impression that your glucose is better, but your condition underneath is not better. It's not going to actually help you protect your organs. And we see, and my ophthalmologist friend has told me in his practice, he sees the correlation. The people on the highest doses of insulin are the ones with the most aggressive and most horrible retinopathy. And that makes sense to me now, even though I've given them the speech before about how you need insulin to be safe. But it never worked. It was like a big lie. So I don't give insulin unless it's extremely brief. Like, let's say they've been in and out of hospital. There's a very short term line on it where it's maybe a 10-day or a 2-week thing because there's an acute, very high glucose. We need to rapidly get it down. Insulin is still your best bet, but with the contract that we need the insulin off as soon as possible.
Yeah.
When it comes to tablets, I use metformin. I use the DPP-4 class of drugs, but I don't like to keep them on long term, and I can tell you why. And the SGLT2 class of drugs, but again, I don't like to keep them on long term for many reasons, mainly for the side effect profile. They both come with some serious possible side effects, where for me, these are not long-term sort of keep going for years and years prescriptions. They are, we need to work on getting you off of these within the next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, that's wonderful advice. So these are tools in our arsenal, but they are not, but I just see so often, once you're on this drug, you come back in 3 months and your prescription gets renewed and there's no real thinking, is this truly a long-term, requirement or not? But I promised I was going to get onto your book. So I'd love to get onto your book. The title is you got it there. Turnaround Diabetes, the step-by-step guide to navigating type 2 and type 1 diabetes with less medication. The last 3 words, I think, are the critical ones. So
Yes.
I'm sad to say I've ordered your book, but it hasn't arrived yet. So I'm so glad that you could show it there.
Yes.
But what I do want to do, before we start talking about it, I want to read an endorsement for your book. And that is, I'm going to read it here. It says, diabetes is rising in India, and young people are becoming more vulnerable to diabetes and similar lifestyle diseases. Dr. Roshani, through her years of experience, has suggested solutions that work for many in the Indian context. This is an interesting read for everyone, particularly the young generation. Now, it's a ringing endorsement. I mean, it's lovely the way it's written, but to me, almost more important are the people that wrote that endorsement, and that's Dr. Anjali Tendulkar, who is a pediatrician, and her husband is Sachin Tendulkar, the former Indian cricketer. And I mean, it's hard to think of a more powerful endorsement to my mind. I mean, what would that be in North America? Maybe Taylor Swift. I don't know. So, if I put myself in your position to have an endorsement from Sachin Tendulkar, my goodness, that must increase your book sales tremendously. What more can you ask for? But the other thing that interests me, because we've got a shared passion for cricket. You're in India, I'm in South Africa, but I'm from South Africa, both cricketing nations. But what I love about Indian cricket, apart from the fact that it's sort of taken over as the nucleus and the mitochondria of the cricket world, as it were, is the women's cricket. And I'm just so impressed by your India women's cricket team. Harmanpreet Kaur is your captain, and the style of cricket that they play. I just wonder, I see it as empowering women in India. And I'd just love to get your thoughts before we talk about your book. Women's cricket in India, and does this empower women? Because we also, on our TV screens, we hear about the problems that women in India face. So I'm hopeful. I hope I'm not naive on this one as well, but that women's cricket can do something for women in India.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. We in India definitely need more women empowerment. I think having a cricket team that can go and bring home glory for the country is a wonderful thing. Celebrating women as athletes and powerful and strong and quick and intelligent and competitive and aggressive It's important. The world needs to see that. Indian men need to see that. Indian women need to see that. Young children in India need to see that. We need to change the power dynamic. India is still struggling with a lot of patriarchy and a lot of misogyny still. I say that as a woman in India raising two girls in this country. We feel very strongly that there are still deep cultural challenges where women still struggle. Even if I take a big city like Mumbai, on a day-to-day basis, it's so relevant. And this is a segue to my book, but it was so relevant. I have a section in my book on patriarchy in the women's health section. Because patriarchy is not just specific to India. It is a thing that is, we all know about it. But India needs to get better, to give a better future to its young children, young girls, young boys. I don't think it's fair to even the boys to be given this false narrative that they are the more powerful or that the women are less powerful. It's not fortunate to either gender. It's harmful to everybody. It's harmful to society, and it creates trouble in society. So yes, India still needs to do better for its girls.
Right. Yeah. So that's fascinating. Thanks for those insights. But I do want to get onto the book. So, how did you come to write it? What are you hoping it will achieve, and how's it going?
Oh, well, I'm always excited to talk about the book. It took me 4 years to complete once I started officially writing regularly, where I committed myself to I'm gonna write, I'm gonna write, I'm gonna write. And I pitched the book. One of your colleagues knows very well how my pitching journey went. And I pitched for about 2 years to agents and to publishing houses, and nobody took it up. I was even told that this is not considered a commercially viable opportunity for them. So they turned it down, even though they thought the manuscript was good. So I decided to self-publish. I said, this book needs to see the light of day. So I have self-published it. So it is blood, sweat, tears, and family money into this book right now. But I believe in it enough that the reason it had to come to be was I felt like I was holding on to, like you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, that I don't think it's by accident that I've accumulated these various multifaceted bases of knowledge to see diabetes from the lens that I see it from. I think it's unique, whether you say it's the India plus US sort of global transcultural exposure or the different field that I've internalized and applied to seeing diabetes differently, my own spiritual growth, my own personal emotional management and self-worth management and negative emotion management showed up in a way where I had to write this because I've brought it in a very comprehensive way. There are books on sleep, there are books on fasting, there are books on low carb, but this book brings you everything about lifestyle. I cover the medications, I cover your blood tests, I cover how to talk with your doctor, I cover how to manage a hospital stay, I cover how to recover from fun if you feel like you had fun and now you need to get back to diabetes focus because when you were having fun, you couldn't pay attention to diabetes, that sort of yo-yo pattern. And I also bring in talking to healthcare providers if they want to transform their practice. So it's a very ambitious book. I sought out to make it the most comprehensive one-stop shop destination book for diabetes in the world, where you can look at this book and open any page and get something out of it, even in the future. So people are going to want to hold on to this book depending on where they are in their diabetes journey.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like it's in many ways a labor of love, an you felt obliged. You had to get, and those are the best books, where there's something in you that you had to get out. You couldn't live with yourself if you didn't get this out. But I'm just astonished to think that you felt obliged to self-publish, that it speaks to me to the bias that still exists in our society, that publishers wouldn't say, wow, this is a no-brainer. Let's just go for it. This is going to be a bestseller. I mean, I struggle to come to terms with that, that you're forced to self-publish, but obviously we wish you all the best. And we'll put a link to your book on this podcast as well. But just in wrapping up, I would like to ask you as well. It's all the things you say, they resonate with me. We see eye to eye on all of these things, really. But have you encountered pushback, colleagues that say don't quite buy what you say? My interpretation is they're not quite there yet, and they'll get there one day, but maybe I'm biased. But yeah, have you had pushback from colleagues?
Maybe not overt pushback. Maybe people have not come out to cancel me publicly. But behind closed doors, a little bit of whispering, a little bit of, oh, she's unconventional. Oh, she's doing something reckless. I've been told, don't talk about diabetes reversal. What if we get sued? So there has been all of those variants of it. I have not paid attention to that. It was lonely during the initial days. If I rewind 10 years ago, there was nobody in India doing this that I had met. If they exist, I'm, asking them to step forward and say hello because I want to know more about you. Now, in the last 5 years, we've had an uptick in startups and coaches and keto and low carb communities in India coming up. And I've met some colleagues now who are doing very good work. But it's finally happening now. So I'm glad that I did what I did for those years because I feel like I've built myself as a very credible long-term brand in this space. But it was very lonely for a long time. To be honest, I've had more of a warm reception from my counterparts in the West. I think they've been doing it for 20 years and 50 years. And, I'm just finishing Gary Taubes's book, Rethinking Diabetes. And it's such a biography it's like a biopic of the whole journey from prehistoric days till now, what we've gone through. And people were right about the right approach even 70 years ago. People were right 50 years ago and 30 years ago, and they tried and they got squashed down. And I feel like now we've finally reached a roaring enough mass where we're all internationally supporting each other. So I got that fresh air from the Western audience to a large extent, especially after this book has come out. And that's given me some more oxygen to keep going.
Yeah, right. And I mean, we have the same hope that at some point one reaches critical mass and then it becomes unstoppable. Once you reach critical mass, you've got there, and hopefully we're getting there. I just want to finish with a quote that I read of yours, and it was, if you can't change your lifestyle, change your doctor. That's what you would tell some of your patients. And I know you would say that in a very empathetic and caring way. You're not trying to shoo them out the office, but
Right.
hopefully it wakes people up. This is what we're recommending, and I'd really like you to be a part of it. But have you had people who just say, no, sorry, I'm not interested in this. Just give me the drugs. I'm happy with the drugs. It
Yeah.
all sounds like way too much work and so on. Is there a subset of people that feels that way?
Yes, they may not say they're happy, but especially with this new miracle drug that's being marketed like that, the semaglutide, I'm seeing a lot more of that. They weren't doing it so much purely for diabetes, but when it comes to the weight loss, miraculousness of it, people are wanting it. And there have been people who have known me for a long time and have come and approached me, will you write it for me? And I've said no, because of the side effect profile, because they're feeling this almost like a desperation, that it'll help me get confidence. And I'm like, okay, it'll give you confidence. The number on the scale will change. And then what? Do you want to be on it for life? We don't have long-term data. Half of the weight you're going to lose is going to be muscle loss, which is bad, retirement planning.
Yeah.
There's stomach paralysis side effects. Are you okay with all of that? No, but then even when I get off of it, I'll get off of it. Okay, what needs to happen when you get off of it? You'll have to change your relationship with your body and your food because otherwise the weight comes right back. Yeah. So then what stops us from doing that now? And so if they feel like they need it, I feel like and you're right, I don't just shoo people away. I'm like, I feel unethical doing that. And I took an oath to do no harm. If it looks like it's harm, if I put my pen on paper and write that for you, if it becomes harm, I ethically cannot tell you that. And it's best if you find a doctor who's okay with giving you that so that you can get the healthcare you are seeking because you are the best expert for what you need at this point in time. And I tell people, doors open. When you feel ready, if you feel ready to make lifestyle changes and you want to get to this at the root, let's talk.
Well, I will just say that's one of the finest summaries of an approach to Ozempic is the trade name here in North America for semaglutide. That's one of the finest summaries I've ever heard. So thank you for that. Just a final question. Are there any kind of key takeaway points, how to get the word out to colleagues, to endocrinology colleagues, maybe, to patients, but also to healthcare systems, administrators, everybody, that this is so important? Any final words?
Well, I've realized with behavior change, we have to offer the carrot that the person is interested in. And as much as my naive self wishes that systems would do it because it's the right thing to do, I realize that their carrot is money.
Mhm.
And, a patient or a colleague, endocrinology burnout is extremely high. And I think one of the reasons is that they're burning out is that diabetes care is very draining on them because they don't feel like they're making a difference. They don't feel like the patient's ever getting better. It's always a battle. The patient's always unhappy at the end of the visit because it's always bad news, because we're treating the condition wrongly. And so the reward is not there. So for colleagues, it's a different carrot. For the patient, it's less medication. So what I decided to do with this book, and this has actually happened in my real life, is, if I was to go to a pharmaceutical company and say, oh, but it'll make lives better. Well, that's not what they're existing for. They're existing for get more profits for their shareholders, not to find the best treatment and heal the most lives. They're trying to sell the most drugs. That's their business promise. So I realize my best option is to get to the individual. And the sad reality is the individual with diabetes is everywhere. They are in pharma, they are in government, they are in hospitals, they are in my colleagues, they are in my patients, they are in my family, they are everywhere. So if I can talk to the person who is affected by diabetes and they wake up for their own personal self-care. So this is actually a self-care multiplied by whatever the population of our planet is, is the thing I'm trying to multiply, is self-care and self-love. And because otherwise I have to go talk to an insurance company in money terms, and companies are doing that, that's the practical way to be, is look, if you back this diabetes reversal program, your insurance company is going to save this many dollars. Say that to Medicare, say that to Medicaid, say that to, well, hospitals are profiting from sickness. So I don't know how the hospital business model is ever going to be interested in reversing diabetes. I don't know. Unless it's through bariatric surgeries, which is when they make money. Not that I don't like hospitals. I love hospitals. We need hospitals, but I don't know if that's the right place to be talking about chronic care management. This is an outpatient thing we need to be doing. So I guess my message depends on the context of who's listening, and we need to get them for things that they're interested in to think about this in a different way.
Yeah, try to talk their language, I guess. But so thank you. That's very insightful. Thank you, Roshani. I just wish there were thousands or tens of thousands of Roshanis around, not just in India, but in North America and Canada, all over the world. It's been really inspiring listening to your insights, learning about your achievements and your programs. I just want to wish you all the best with this, such an exciting book, but also it's a monumental task you've set for yourself, but I think it's a very rewarding task. One of our other guests said, this is happy medicine, because getting people off their medications, giving them control over their lives in such wonderful ways. I mean, it's very rewarding. It's why we became doctors in the beginning, I think.
Yeah.
And just wishing you luck in blazing the trail that you have chosen. So thank you. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. I want to thank our producer, Anne Mullins, our technical guru, Graham Wheeler, and thanks to the Institute for Personalized Therapeutic Nutrition, IPTN, for sponsoring this series. IPTN also sponsors 2 websites, which we'll put links on for you, for our listeners. Once again, I'm Dr. Charles Helm. You've been listening to At the Helm, and I have been interviewing Dr. Roshani Sanghani. Really hope you've enjoyed today's podcast, and I hope we can see each other again soon. Thank you.